everybody? Okay, I woke you up. All right. I'm Jerry. That's an alias, isn't it? I'm Geraldine and Colette. And I'm from the Friends of the Museum and History Center. And I certainly am happy to see all your faces here. But I don't know what's wrong with the front row. So if you come in late, you're going to walk in front of everybody. Come on in. I don't see all of our friends from the board here, but I will introduce their names at least. Jim Nelson is a wonderful note taker. That's what he calls himself, takes notes. And Jeff Ormandy, pretty well known around here, he used to be a journalist for Daily Record. Paula McFarland, wave back there, okay? And she makes sure that we don't spend too much money. Then we have Terry Meeks. Well, wait, you got to wave longer because they're going to turn their heads, okay? And she does a newsletter for us, plus she gives several classes on genealogy. Clever little gal she is. And Jean Toto, every time I see that name, I think of, that wonderful little movie that Toto was the little dog. Oh, okay. All right. And Ann Zielinski, she didn't slide in here, did she? So those are on the board. And at this time, I'd like to invite Lisa Stutz to come up and introduce herself as director, but her new faces and old faces that are working here.
Thank you, Jerry. So we've had a couple different changes on staff this year. We've had some staff leave, and we've been able to hire some new curator and new education coordinator. Keith Wondra is our new curator who started just over a month now, and Jessica Wortman is our new education coordinator who started 3 weeks ago, just about. We are looking for a new archives librarian, and hopefully in the next time you see us, we'll have a full staff. This program is going to be recorded and will be eventually available to see on Channel 191, the city's local broadcasting channel, and hopefully our YouTube account as well. So please follow us on our Facebook and see when that gets posted. Thank you so much.
You know, I've been amiss. Dan, would you stand up, please? That man comes and just volunteers to do these videos for us. Thank you. Did you ever wonder why a cowboy and his work with cattle is really important? Or do you even think it is? Oh, yeah. Okay. Did you ever wonder why, no matter how long they live, they're still a cow boy? You know, I looked around at shoes. You all wondered what I was doing. I was looking at your shoes. Okay, well, no matter what you wore, I happen to have worn leather shoes. I see our speaker has. A few of you worn leather straps. You know, that comes from hide. It's tanned. Now, the rest of you, I think, are wearing those cool canvas things. I saw a lot of those. I don't blame you. But did you know they cannot stay together without the glue that is made from cows? Yeah, so you're all wearing a cow. Also, I'm not going to give you a whole lecture on this, but have you thought about this? At home, you have a wooden chair, right? Maybe more than one. What holds it together? Usually it's glue. That comes from cattle. Now you're sitting in metal chairs. A little different? Well, yes, but not. You see, we use metal in so many ways. Cars, bikes, trucks, buses, tractors, mowers. I probably could keep going on. Did you realize that they cannot make that metal without the tallow from a cow? When it's heated and it's being manufactured, the only way to turn it is to put some of that grease in from the cow. So think about this. Plywood, particle board, everything, plastic, even the rubber on your shoes, and we couldn't have tires if it wasn't for our cattle. It was kind of found unexpectedly, because if you've been where they let the rubber out of the tree, it just runs like white milk. But you can't form it into a shape until you have pieces and parts of a cow. So all of you brought a cow with you, didn't you? We've learned from those Native Americans. They used every part of a cow. And when a cow is harvested in our major places, almost every part is used. Nothing is wasted. Which makes me remember something that was astounding to me. Maybe you already know it. I was in India, and part of the tour took us to some corrals. Now, you know, the cow is sacred. You don't run over it. They eat in your yard, anybody's yard, anything. They're all over. But in the corrals, there were no cows. They were out. And there were women, Indian women, sitting on little short stools in the corral in the manure. And I'm walking in there and thinking, what are they doing? They were using their hands, not plastic gloves, and gathering up the manure and shaping it, squeezing it together. What do you think they were doing? I heard something.
Blocks in the houses, they use it for heating, they use it for, I was there.
Okay.
That's everything they told me about the logs.
But they were preparing incense. So when you burn incense, you think about that. Well, most people think of cows only for hamburgers and steaks and roasts and, that good stuff. And that is one reason that they came here in the first place from other places. You all know about Cripple Creek. It's just one of some 40 little places. Most of them aren't even houses or anything there anymore, that were gold camps or silver camps. And back in 1859, our gold rush started 10 years after California. And I don't blame those people, because they say that 100,000 people tried to get to California and only half of them maybe made it. The others, I think they found gold a little sooner, so they stayed here. Then you think, how soon after that? The Civil War, 2 years. 1861, for 4 years, we're shooting at each other. Not a pretty picture. In fact, those who had cattle in the areas of like Texas, they refused to take cattle to the east because, hey, they're going to get in the way of the cannons and all there. What good is that? So something kind of different developed. The miners here, like in Cripple Creek, because that's so close to us, we can identify, came out from those tunnels, and they're mighty hungry. What are they going to eat? Well, Canyon City eventually provided some vegetables. But before that, some of those miners were better at shooting than they were at mining, and they gave up the mining. Can't get enough to eat there, can't find the gold. So they went out in those forests and they shot the deer and they provided meat for the miners until there weren't any more deer. Now, why weren't there any more deer? Aren't they reproducing? Well, think about this. They were shaded and protected by the trees. That's all natural. However, the miners cut down the trees. They needed the taller trees for poles down in the tunnels to hold them up. They needed the wood to keep warm and to cook their meals. So then finally, there's not enough trees around either, so why would the deer hang out there? Well, here we come. Famous cattle drives began. And you're going to recognize some of these names. I'm not going to name them all. But one of the first ones was Samuel Hartzell. Don't we have a place named Hartzell? Okay, he was one of the first who brought some cattle to the miners. And then there was John Iliff. And if you recognize that little area of Colorado is right on 225 around Denver. And the famous, probably most famous one is Goodnight and Loving. What a great name. 2 names. Well, they got into the action as well as Grant's maternal grandfather, whom Grant is named after. You know that name? Where's that Lisa? She's always looking for grants. Yeah, granted, she's always looking for grants. So anyway, Grant's maternal grandfather not only brought cattle, he went up there to Cripple Creek too, right around 1890. So it's pretty well established there. And that's kind of smart. He starts a butcher shop. Well, that makes sense. A grocery store. Of course. Why hadn't somebody thought of that before? So I can see why he's kind of proud of Grandpa Grant. Later, he helped Teddy Roosevelt in 1906. You know, statistics show that in 1867, that's just right after the Civil War, we had 147,000 cattle in Colorado. Sounds like a heck of a lot, doesn't it? But remember, the population wasn't very big. You know what each cattle was worth? $22.10. Can you buy a steak for that today? Now, from the 1940s to 2000, the number of cattle doubled in Colorado. The value increased the most in 1970s to $700 per cow. What do you think it's worth today? Maybe Grant knows. You need to know how many homes during the Civil War no longer had their dads with them, their parents, only mama. Fathers were gone. Well, some of them came to get rich with, finding gold. Others were in the war. So 10, 11, 12, and so on, boys were responsible for bringing in the bacon. And they got hired by our trail guides. They didn't even have to ride a horse at first, because you walked them. And they became our cowboys. That's the beginning. How about that one? So now, at this time, I'd like to introduce Grant. And his name is not Adkisson, it's Adkisson. His mother made that sure, I knew that. Like that kiss in the middle. Well, Grant's lived in this area almost all of his life. But I understand Grandpa was from Greeley? Your grandpa, was he from Weld County? Me too. Actually, that's where I'm from too. Now, Grant has been involved in the Blue Ribbon Ranch west of Greeley. That's your grandpa. And then not only that, it seems like they all held a couple of jobs. He was sheriff. Yeah. For some years. And then he became president of the Colorado State Peace Officers. What do we call them now? Okay. After there was quite a financial loss, as you all are aware of, there was a cattle crash in the 1930s. And he bought a ranch west of Gunnison, and he was county commissioner for many years. And he ranched there until he returned to Canyon. Grant, of course, is named after his uncle that came to Canyon. His uncle married Estelle. I don't hear that name much anymore. And they ranched for many decades on the Twin Mountain Ranch on 8 mile north of Highway 50. You all probably passed it. And then on 11V Ranch in Wilson Creek, and I think I saw a V on the brand he's going to show you. For many years, Grant has raised cattle and horses. He's preached cowboy church services at many rodeos, including Cheyenne Frontier Days and the National Finals Rodeo and the Houston Rodeo and the National Western in Denver and many more. He kind of gets around. He was an avid team roper for many years. He's outfitted and guided hunters and in many outdoor TV shows. And he traveled with Michael Martin Murphy. Heard of that guy? Waddy Mitchell, R.W. Hampton, and Sons of the San Joaquin, how do you say that? Joaquin. And he did 2 TV shows, guess what? With Dale Evans and Roy Rogers. Welcome, Grant.
Gosh, I ought to hire her. But Jerry came on as a young teacher when my mom was teaching here. And my mom started teaching in Sapanero that is under Blue Mesa. There's a couple of buildings up above it, they call it now, but the town is actually underneath Blue Mesa. And started there because my granddad was county commissioner and they couldn't get a teacher, and she was 18 years old and enrolled at Gunnison Western State in the education teaching courses. And so they let her do summer school and some nighttime classes, and she taught in that one-room schoolhouse. And so that's how she started, and that's Jerry came on when she was here. I think my mom taught just a little under 50 years, counting when she started at 18, about 46 or 7, but I'm glad to do that. I learned some about cows, about cattle. I know my favorite part. Hey, brother, good to see you. I didn't see you when I came in, but anyway, I do a lot of banquets, and they always ask me, you know, the little waitresses, and they come up, or the gals doing it, they'll go, "Would you like beef or chicken?" And I always tell them, I say, "Ma'am, chickens have never hurt me. I've had cattle knock my horses down, kick me, slap me in the face with manure in their tail. I eat beef in self-defense, ma'am. Every one I eat can't hurt me." They don't know what to say at that point, but then I tell them, plus it tastes a lot better. So, Jerry was pretty close on most things, on almost everything. There's a couple, but Grant was actually my dad's family, on my dad's family, but not a big deal. And she mentioned leather shoes, and kindergarten I might have had leather shoes. I haven't had any leather shoes, but I've got lots of pair of leather boots. But I do have some tennis shoes, and I'm teasing her. But we found out a lot of good things about our background. I want to thank you. I want to thank our staff, and I don't know if Lisa's still in here. She may be in her office working. I've always loved this museum. I came down here all the time, rode my bike down from up on North 9th Street where we lived, and loved to go through it. Used to love all the wildlife exhibits with Dahl DeWeese and some other things, and actually need to get back down here where and I've kind of need to apologize for that. I've been a Boone and Crockett scorer for years, and one of Dahl's rams definitely made Boone and Crockett. We put that one in the record book, but we also need to verify that he is very probably the very first person to take all 4 species of North American sheep, called the Grand Slam. And I've had the privilege to do that. I have 1 sheep short of 2 Grand Slams, and there's only about less than 2,000 people have ever done that, but I believe he's not listed as the first, but from my records and the museum's records, I think he was the first one to do that. So I need to get down and verify those dates and then get that changed for all the years. Anyway, enough on all that, but I'm glad to be here at the museum, and I'm thrilled to get to share with all of you. So as Jerry shared some of, and I'll fill in just a little bit, my cowboy and ranch history, and there is cattleman, and then we've affectionately, I use the term cowhands or hands to differentiate somebody who's really good on a horse and somebody who may look like a cowboy or whatever, and I used to call them drugstore cowboys when I was young. My mom used that term. But there's a lot of that, and that's okay too, to want to be a wannabe. I'd rather have them be a wannabe that than a lot of other things in our country. And a lot of great heritage there. And I'll get on to some of what we do now with the rodeo and the military and all that. But to start with, my maternal grandfather, my mom's dad, was born in Virginia, 1860. Small home, large family, small farm. He was in the middle. So at 11 years old, his mom and dad said, "You need to make your own way." The older 2 are helping, only 2 or 3 are helping run this little farm, helping walk behind a mule, or maybe in some cases pull the plow. And the babies need mom to take care of them, but you're in the middle, and you need to make your way. So he started walking west. Horace Greeley wrote, that was 6 years after Horace Greeley wrote when he was 11, when my granddad was 11, was 6 years after Horace Greeley said, "Go west, young man." So I don't know if he heard that or not, but he started walking, and he walked from Virginia to Missouri. Wore out 9 pair of boots, he told me, and found it pretty easy on a well-worn trail. You can imagine that there were many little homesteads and homes, and he'd just knock on a door, say, "Could I do any chores for a meal and a place to sleep in the barn?" And that's how some of them kept him for months, because it might have been harvest time, or they might have had repairs to do, or different things. So he walked from Virginia to Missouri and got to working, which Missouri at that time was kind of the farthest of the settled places. If you remember Jeremiah Johnson, some of the others, that was kind of their jumping off place to the wilderness to the west. And so he started working at a cattle ranch there, found no problem getting enough work, and ended up there and built up some of his own herd, ended up pushing them into Kansas, and then on eventually into Colorado. And I remember him making that statement. They were finding gold. They'd already found gold, but it was still going pretty strong, the gold rush in Cripple Creek then and the gold production. And so I remember him saying, I'm not going down one of those holes in the ground, but if they've got gold, they're going to want to eat beef. And that's what he knew. They had, I think, a male cow, some other stuff he told me about as a boy, but he got heavily involved in it, Missouri, and that's what he did. Began ranching up Beaver Creek, ran some cattle over on Shelf Road area. The Presentation Act of 1812 and the Homestead Act of 1882 were still in effect, so he did some homesteading and had some property there, and 160 acres was readily available. So my granddad was English, like many of the names of the early ranchers that came here. Dave Walker was one of the early ranchers. If you look up some of the books, I've not looked up, to be honest with you, anything, and I use the internet a lot, but I'll give you a number of names, and I could have given you 100 more that I remember my granddad talking about. But Walker was one. Walker brought some of the early cow herds right into Fremont County, started Black Mountain Ranch that became the Stirrup Ranch. And I think there was another name in the middle there. But anyway, and ranched there for many years. Paul Huntley worked for him. And if you've not taken advantage, the museum used to have still a few of Paul Huntley's books for sale, or I'm sure the library has them. You can read them. It's kind of fun because some of them are Black Mountain Cowboy and his horses. And of course, my namesake, which was my dad's, he was really like a granddad to me because he was the oldest brother, I think, of 7 kids. My dad was the baby. And so he was actually my uncle, and it was Grant Adkisson, and that's who I was named after, and came out of Kansas. And I'll give you a little history on him in a minute, how all this ties together with Fremont County. But anyway, it's kind of fun because I have all those books. I haven't gone through a lot of them in years, and one of them's been out on our table. I think it's a man and his horses. And so here's the picture, and it says, here's on horseback, 1928 is the date on it, and it says Dudley Van Buskirk. I'll talk about him a little bit. Paul Huntley, Grant Adkisson on the gray horse. And it's kind of neat because I hate people look at that and they'll go, "You've aged really well." And I tell them, I said, I know, it's healthy eating and fresh air. So, and some of them are not sharp enough to pick up on that, I guess. But anyway, so 1928 was the horses. He actually came in the 20s, and I'll give you some history on that in a minute. But anyway, Paul Huntley then later worked for Dudley Van Buskirk, and there was Dud Jr. that came on later, had the Locked Horns Cafe, if any of you are old enough, where Buckskin Joe entrance was for a long time. And I worked for them up there and worked cattle for him too. But anyway, the senior Dudley Van Buskirk came, I think, in some of that era around Charlie Goodnight, some of the great history in Pueblo. But anyway, then my uncle, like a granddad, really, I kind of considered him that because their dad had died many, many years before, maybe when my dad was even not born or very young, with cancer terribly there in Kansas. And you can imagine the lack of care back in those days. And so all I can remember is one old picture later. So Grant, Uncle Grant, was really like a granddad, and he married Dud Van Buskirk's daughter. That's Estelle. And so that's how he was tied in to that, and then began working on the ranch. And then as Dudley, many years later, couldn't do anything, kind of took that over, and his son, my uncle, gave young Dud their choice. Do you want the north side of Highway 50? You want the south side? And so Dudley Jr. took the south side, which is where the Royal Gorge is, and the country between it. Now some of the zip line, I think, and the other stuff was all country I rode, because we rode it, gathered cattle all my life from when I was 5 years old on. And by the way, in those years from 5, I probably rode a little before that, but the all-day deals, 5 to maybe when I was in my 20s, or at least graduated from high school here and a little beyond, I could not figure out why anybody rode horses for recreation. That was beside me. They go, "Yeah, we keep horses, and what fun it is to go ride." And I'm going, I love horses, had some great horses, but the back of my lap gets really tired. That's the politically correct way to say that nowadays. But anyway, because we didn't get off, it was like a lot of the cattle were spooky. So it's like you don't get down and go to the bathroom. You hold it, or now you forgive me, ladies, but when I was with Dale Evans and Roy, she was very blunt. We had a great time, and we did those 2 TV shows on with Dale. And she said, yes, Roy and I were the host, and it's either the Rose Bowl Parade or the whatever it is with all the flowers, and all their floats are solid flowers all the way up. So she said we used a ladder, and it was all solid flowers, and it was like a horse, and Roy's there. And just before we started, we'd been a couple hours, he said, I have to go to the bathroom. She said, Roy, there's no way. The ladders and stuff are way back there putting on the rest of the flowers, and there's no way. You're going to have to hold it. Well, the Rose Bowl Parade's a little long. So she said pretty soon I noticed him grimacing. I noticed him wiggling. He had on his sequin outfit and all that, which was really neat. I learned on that. Now, this isn't all that I had to share, but do you know why I did that? He was a pretty plain fella. It was because he said those kids, he had probably one of the biggest hearts and was known as the only person in Hollywood at that time that answered every single letter personally. And they had thousands of them stacked up. He said, if they're going to spend 2 cents to mail a letter back then, I'm going to write them. They deserve it. But they had to pay 10 cents to get in to the Madison Square Garden or the other places to see Roy and Dale. And he said from that, no, I call it nosebleed section. I don't know what she said he called it. They have no idea who they're seeing. They paid 10 cents to see Roy Rogers. But when the lights hit those sequins and stuff, they can go, Mom, I saw Roy Rogers and I watched him ride this horse. And that's why he went with that. But she said he had all that on. And in a little while, I looked over and he was going. She said, you didn't. And he said, yes, I did. So that, I'm not mentioning me at all on that. I will tell you that the endurance riders that ride a lot of those Arabs and Arab, which I've had quarter horses my whole life, but that's kind of the program when you're doing a 100-mile race and you're trying to win. But anyway, so I couldn't figure out how that was recreational, but apparently it was. But later then, my granddad did start the butcher shop. I don't need to go on that. Kind of was the original Montfort, where he put beef from the field, the pasture to the table. And that's how Teddy Roosevelt, he did help him on 2 of these hunts, 03 and 06, because think what they did. Roosevelt was president during that time, huge entourage, newspaper people traveled with him, all the other things. Well, there's no refrigeration, so you got to butcher a beef or 2 every day. So he had the cattle, he had the horses, and he hunted, knew the country a lot, and was in on that, and even went as far as, I can't remember, he might have gotten the world record, Boone and Crockett, Roosevelt did, held for years, and a good friend of mine broke that out of Pagosa Springs that I did his weddings. But anyway, that could have been close to Cripple Creek. So all that history. So between 1903 and 1906, he was enlisted to do some of those lengthy trips. I love that. I don't know how you do it now, but some of Roosevelt's trips were 2-month hunting trips. I'm going to be gone hunting deer. I'll be back in 2 months. Okay. So I guess the train ride, all the rest, but that president's entourage. And so anyway, and then my oldest aunt, that would be my granddad had 4 daughters, and my oldest aunt taught school. She went on to get her doctor's degree, was taught in Arizona for many years after college, but in her younger days, kind of like my mom, she taught at the schoolhouse up Red Canyon, if you've seen the little schoolhouse on the corner, and she lived with either the Hall family or the Chess family at different times, which was common back then. Almost all the school moms were single, and they didn't have a place to stay. And of course, we have a Miss Shoemaker back here, but that tied in all with the Chess family and all of that. But that's what they did. They lived and ate with those families, taught their kids in school, and then she, of course, went on and went to Gunnison, farther doctor's degree, all the rest. So that's kind of what they did. And I heard a lot of stories about my granddad's friendship with people. If you look it up online, I would guess, I don't know if any of Paul's books are available now, but he mentioned some. But I remember my granddad talking about Tall Witcher and Stump Witcher. And I remember Mom, which Stump isn't mentioned at all in any of Paul Paul Harvey, Huntley, Paul Huntley's books. But Stump was a friend of my dad's or my granddad's, my mom's dad. We're still on him at this point. And I could not believe that. She said, he would tell me, my mom told me first, and I could not picture this because my granddad had gone from walking from Virginia to Missouri, pushing cattle all the way in over a lengthy period of time, ranching and doing all that stuff, pretty tough on horses. Probably some of the stories I heard were why I cheated, and I'll tell you about cheating with raising colts and starting colts in a little bit, but they didn't do that. They were 4 or 5 years old, and so a board across the face or head or so, pretty brutal stories I heard as a kid and didn't like because I loved horses, even if my rear end didn't like them. But so anyway, he would, when I knew him well, he always wore a white shirt, always. If you've ever heard, it's kind of funny because I loved that at the moment I heard it. But, oh gosh, who's the singer that sings the song about his grandpa? Well, it did Forever and Ever, Amen, and a bunch of the others. I can't think of his name, big, deep voice. Yeah, no, not, well, maybe that was George that did Forever, but it's, yeah, Randy Travis has the song about his granddad in starched white shirt, buttoned at the top. That was my granddad. Never saw an Adam's apple. It's always buttoned. And usually would put on, if he's going to go somewhere, a suit coat, because he went on after that to be more of a cattleman than a cowboy. And again, Sheriff of Well County, I'll touch on that, State Peace Officers Association, National Western. And it was hard for me to imagine what my mom told me about the stories he and Tall Witcher, Stump Witcher, Woody Higgins, and they would leg wrestle. I said, they'd what? Indian wrestle. They'd lay down and get their legs and they'd go like this and this and this, and then you'd catch one another and flip them over. Mike went, my granddad? Yeah, that's what they did. With Stump Witcher was a guy that beat him all the time, and he really liked him. And Charlie Canterbury, Woody Higgins, all those guys. And if you looked up all the early ranchers, it's a fascinating thing. I use, as I said, the internet, but I've never done that. But I would guess, I'm hoping you could do it. So later, don't know why he left this area. That I didn't know, but he went to west of Greeley, owned the Blue Ribbon Ranch, which I've been to. It's now a golf course and a high-rise, but that's what it was, and was elected sheriff of Well County, which I never thought about my whole life. I still have his badge. My mom made sure she emphasized 14 karat gold, and it says on the back of it, Bert Corder, that was the last name, C-O-R-D-E-R, Hubert Lee Corder. Of course, I think everybody back then after the Civil War was named Lee, after you can imagine why. And so on it says, and it says 1928, President, Colorado State Peace Officers Association. I've got the picture. It's a huge, one of those long things. I don't know how they did them back then. And all the guys, some kneeling and all the rest. He was right in the middle in the front. Very disappointing to me. Very disappointing. One cowboy hat in the whole darn group. They looked like gangsters. They had all those fedora things on. And of course, it was in Denver at the state convention when he's president. And I thought these guys were sheriffs. I mean, I watched Marshall Dillon never wore a fedora in his life. So it was kind of disappointing to me as a kid, but I've got the picture in my hallway right now, and just some neat stuff. And so it was hard for me to imagine him doing leg wrestling and a lot of the stuff they talked about, but that was kind of where he was. And the thing that shocked me, yeah, he was sheriff of Well County, no big deal. About 2 years ago, I was coming in from maybe Nebraska, eastern Nebraska somewhere, and I turned to take a short cutoff road, maybe right out of Burlington. I thought, I don't want to go all the way on 70 again. So I took this cutoff road and I see Well County, and I went, Well County. So I got on my little phone. Well, now don't tell our former police officer that, but there wasn't any other cars on the road. So I'm on my phone because that's a little back road. And I went, the little MapQuest jobber thing, whatever you got on your phones. It was like 120 miles to Greeley. I thought, how did he patrol that in 1920s? I mean, what would you do? Somebody has a murder 120 miles away and you're going to get on your horse, go investigate. Well, that takes how many weeks or days, I don't know, but I didn't put that in a picture. Well, anyway, let's skip to, oh, by the way, then the cattle crash and a whole bunch of other crashes happened around 1930. And he had enough money left from selling the ranch, I guess, selling cattle, to buy the ranch at Doyleville. Does anybody know where Doyleville is? It's between Monarch Pass and Gunnison. And bought that ranch, had the little white schoolhouse that many of you, if you ever looked over, could see. It's not there now. They moved it to across from the college as you come into Gunnison in a Pioneer Park. But that was where my mom went to school. They rode their horses over in the winter, took a sled across Tamichi Creek and through the snow, and went to school there. And that's where he ranched. It was kind of fun. When I got there, you know, I love the way they did old things. It's part of why I like a museum. But when I got to go to college there, it was the same place my mom and all the family went. I went 1968, went to the West Side Grocery. It's not there anymore. It's a big antler shop if any of you drive through and you like horns, antlers. But it was West Side Grocery. And the guy's about 80, and he goes, "You're Bert Corder's grandson." I understand. I said, "Yes, sir." I never did stay in the dorms and stuff because Mr. Jorgensen, who the park is named after now when you come into Gunnison, is Jorgensen Park. They just had a huge 4th of July deal there. Shut down Highway 50. That surprised me. But the truckers loved that, having to go somewhere clear north. And Jorgensen was the young county commissioner, young guy who wanted to get elected. My granddad helped him. So he said, "You're not staying in the dorm. You'll stay at we've got a home behind on the Twin Bridges back in there," and that's where I was. But anyway, the grocery store guy said, "I remember your granddad, and we'll just do exactly what my granddad and uncle did for him, so you're fine." I said, "I'm not sure what that is, sir." "Well, he paid his grocery bill once a year when he sold his calf crop. So you just charge groceries all year, and when do you make money?" I said, "I come back and work for Southern Colorado Power Company in the summer." "So you got more money in September?" "Yeah." "Well, that's fine. Well, you start in September, charge all year. We'll hold it through the summer. And then when you get back, you can pay your year's grocery bill." I said, "Sounds fun to me. I guess that'll work." So we ate pretty good and I always paid my bill. But that was back then. Now, my dad's oldest brother that I mentioned that I'm named after came from Kansas in the 20s. Married Estelle Van Buskirk, 1930, December 5th, 1930. And her dad, of course, owned all kinds of, and ran cattle on all kinds of property. And that's who Paul Huntley worked for and then partnered with. And he had a ranch on Current Creek. He had a horse ranch off of Black Mountain, Shaw Park, 10 miles north of Canyon. And Dud, at that time that my family, my granddad, uncle, married his daughter, was running over 500 head of cattle. I know in 1923, because I've seen the bill of sale when they sold 500 and some, and they had more than that, which is a lot of cattle, I think, in any era. And then they went into partnership. They bought Lon Gribble's, if you've been up Gribble Hill, know where that is. Lon Gribble's Ranch in Webster Park, Buck Gribble's Ranch in Wilson Creek. And then my uncle had he had the Twin Mountain Ranch where the rafting things are, but he also later on bought some of Wilson Creek down to Nate Patton's, and that's where we rode 3 days before he passed away. I gathered cattle with him. His little dog got kicked, I remember, and I jumped off. He wasn't too agile back in those days as he was getting older, and I jumped off, checked the dog. She's fine. We talked all that time, and he just a neat time. And I remember him sharing. He said, "I've never even shared this with Estelle, but he said, I want to tell you something. There's no way to really make a living these days on this place, and I've already sold part of Twin Mountain Ranch to the Kedrick family. Kid's still there, has been involved here in the museum a lot." And he said, "So no way to do that." But he said, I've asked the Lord for many years. I don't want to lay in a bed like my dad did and broke the family financially and emotionally for, you can imagine back in those era, for years and years and years with cancer in a hospital bed. And he said, "I've asked the Lord, I've never told anybody this, but I asked the Lord, take me home when I'm doing something I love doing. I just don't want to, I'm not trying to be selfish, and I love being on earth, but take me home when I'm doing something I love doing." 3 days later, he was the appraiser and on the board for the Fremont National Bank, and drove to Westcliff, appraised a herd of cattle, pulled down into what we call rinky dinks, which is how the Sportsman's Association started. And Nate Patton was there, watched a team roping, Came home, walked in the back door, still told him what was for supper, laid down on the big leather couch and never woke up. And that sunk in on me a long time. I didn't like it back then because that's such a shock. Now that I'm older, it's like, I think that'd be a better way to go, Lord, than months or years in a hospital bed. So that was his story with that. So they bought all that, and then Van Buskirk had both sides. And so when he kind of passed that on to the two boys, one son-in-law, my uncle, and his own son, my uncle gave him the choice. You want south or north? And he took south. We worked all that, he built that little restaurant, the Lochtorns Cafe, had the deer in it with that. And we did more and stayed on that. So I'll get into some of those things. The 30s, lots of dry years. I remember him talking about that. But a few of the things about cattle in those early days, a lot of them were really wild. Some of them never got caught. I remember them talking about hunting them just like deer. What they'd try to do is push them close enough to where they could get the meat out. Obviously, they're a lot bigger than a deer. And they would have usually their lever action rifles. He shot a 32 special. A lot of the guys had 30-30s back then, 25-20s, 32-20 caliber lever action in their scabbard. And they'd push them down, and they would shoot them because you couldn't catch them. There was no way to do them. They gotten older, bigger. I remember some that we hadn't gotten, and we didn't shoot them back then. But their calves were caught and sold many times. They knew the cows, and they'd go, yep, this is the 5th calf we've got off her, but we've never had human hands on her. And then when they got sold, they couldn't reproduce. They'd shoot them on that. The cowboys would rope the cows, and that would be kind of part of their procedure with that. And I never did that. I did shoot my first deer up there on the ranch when I was 9 years old. And I can remember telling Press Steele, which if you know our local game wardens here, Bob Carochi, that's his granddad. And I worked cattle for Preston Steele. He had a ranch with Melba on the great book she wrote on some, I don't know, he was a game warden and rancher, raised longhorns. And I worked for him, rode for him a lot up there. And I remember walking out of Jimmy's sporting goods store, the only sporting goods store in town, and there was Preston Steele, a game warden, and I was about 13. And he said, how you doing, Grant? I said, I'm good. He goes, did you get your deer this year? I said, I got 5 of them, sir. He said, you got 5 of them? I said, yes, sir. I said, that's what they've always had me do, because, you know, when my Uncle Grant homesteaded, he was in his 20s, and some of the neighbors, most of them didn't have hired hands, so they neighbored, and some of them were in their 30s. Well, now when I come along hunting, they're 80 and beyond. So the deal was, you help them get out. Nobody had a walker, but 2 canes, get them on a rock, try to push a deer to them. They'd love to shoot their own at 88 or whatever age, 91. But if they don't get one, they cowboyed their whole life. So they have Social Security and deer meat. That's it. So you go in the rough country, get their deer for them, get it out for them. And so I said, I'm giving you a little more than I gave the game warden. I said, but I said, so sir, I said, I got one for Nat Stubbs, had been a race jockey. He got thyroid and was very large when he died. Jack Maris, that our arena is named after. I said, I got one for Mr. Maris. Dane Black, Doc Black. I said, I got one for, and I said, Mr. Steele, I've watched those guys get kicked by horses, have a horse fall with them and roll and get up and work the rest of the day. But they just cry when I bring them that deer meat. And I can't believe they'll take the ribs and cut, on a deer and cut the meat out and then scrape in their little silver meat grinder that's clamped to the kitchen table. And they'll scrape that meat off there. They use every bit of that. And they're just tough men, but they get teary-eyed. And I said, that's how I got 5 of them, sir. And he just looked at me and said, good for you, son. He said, those deer, their forefathers and mothers, the deers, the bucks and the does have been eating on that place since he said, Granddad got it in 1920 something. And he said, good for you. You take care of those old men. Now I'd be arrested today, but I didn't know it wasn't legal. We just did that to help those guys. And I can't imagine, my Social Security's not very much now, but I can't imagine what they got back that would have been 1963. And that's what they had, was deer meat to eat all year if they could get one, and Social Security. So that's what we did. And so how'd we handle those things at that? I didn't do the shooting part. The cows often would be roped and tied to a tree. So what I had when we started doing some of that, we didn't have to do very much, but I did do some of it in other places for some of the wilder spots. Pressed steel, some on Black Mountain, big wide open country. Some of the others, you'd have a longer rope and then you'd have some shorter stuff. And you needed a 50-foot rope and stuff because they're hard to get stopped on a big older cow. And then go try to get your horse around the tree and get a time or two around, tie him up there. Most of the time, I don't know if I was chicken or what, some of the guys would just they'd pushed him enough and then rope him, and they'd try to lead him then or get him out then. But I usually left them the best way I thought, leave them overnight because they're tired. Now what we do is we'd catch the calf and then use a little short rope to put a non-slip knot around the cow's neck and a short rope with her calf where he can't get around behind her or do something, and leave them overnight. They're fine. By the time they've been overnight, then you could take them, leave the rope on, and you could push him, or sometimes take it off, and you could begin to push them down to the lower country. So we did some of that, leave them tied. And also, we'd leave the calf on them because it was hard. All of them had horns back then, all the cows. And they'd hook your horse, they were wild and whatever. Well, they couldn't do that very well with dragging their kid, with them. And so that was a good way to do it. But once they'd gone through that, then they could push them. And I remember hearing the stories how they'd push them down Main Street, past the prison. They're going to get them to some place. There was a butcher shop, I think, where one of the, maybe Fremont Bank was, I don't know, years later, whatever. And I know there was a livery stable in that area, but anyway, and they talked about bringing 200 head past the prison, and they'd caught them and roped them and gone through that. Well, what we did, we'd gather all the mother cows and the calves in May. It had to be May. It had to be the first weekend in May. Some of you would say, well, when'd you put bulls in? Well, a lot of times they were in a lot of the time, and some of those calves were huge, and I had to flank them. I'll tell you about that in a moment. But it had to be May. The early calves were pretty big to flank and hold and brand and vaccinate, castrate, earmark, dehorn. But it had to be done the first weekend in May. I can tell you why. Sorry, but I've had the privilege to speak at it for many years when we did Cowboy Church, but it was Blossom Festival. And my granddad said, there's about 400 nuts that come to this town all over from Denver and all over the place. We're out of town that whole weekend. So we'd go and it, so I didn't know what it was till I got older and found out there were actually girls from bands, the Blossom Festival. But so we'd go up Friday night, spend the night on the ranch. We'd gather all day Saturday, leave in the morning, usually didn't eat lunch. A lot of times, that's why I think the older cowboys said that too. They'd eat a big breakfast, then they'd eat a big supper because most of the time you were horseback all day. And then we'd spend the night, and then we'd brand all day Sunday. And we missed all of Blossom Festival, and they just loved that for some reason. But anyway, that's what we did. And we'd go through all of that. Good horses, loved to ride, dark till dark many times, even though, like I said, the back of my lap didn't like it. And the method we'd do with that, we'd put them all in one big corral. Now, we didn't then, with his cattle, because he didn't have as many wild ones or much at all. Sometimes we'd know which ones would maybe hook you if you were branding or whatever, but we'd get them all in one big corral. Most of the time since then, I've done as many as 800 head down in New Mexico and stuff and sort them with good horses. And that's a great way to do it. And I've never done it cutting professionally, but those kind of horses are worth it. We didn't do that. We'd just be in with just 2 or 3 of us on foot, and we'd just sort the cows out. Somebody on the gate, we'd get all calves in there. And then I'd just walk in and flank a calf. And so we did it all by hand. And I'll mention a little bit more on that in a moment, but we did it all on foot. A lot of people didn't. There was lots of different ways to do it, but and I've done that on some of the bigger cow outfits and some of those with the sorting horses and all that. But once we did it, have a good branding fire going. The iron's hot. This one is not at all like what we used because that's a horse brand. We used only flat irons. And a lot of the old timers only wanted flat irons because you didn't have to have them made. So if you had hearts or circles, not all of them, lots of folks made brands, but the old timers I was around, Gunnison and here, wanted a straight iron. It's pretty easy to put it on. You just go, you got a V, 2 times you got 11, doesn't take very long. Plenty of irons in the fire. For a horse brand, they don't hold still so well and you don't flank them. And so the key on that is, and I've never had a problem doing it, get an iron really hot. These are all copper, so they get totally red. And by the time they jump away, they're branded because they don't feel it instantly. So you put it on, some put shoulder, but we've always done left hip. Put it on, and when they jump from it, you're done, and it's a good enough hot brand to do. So, and I know the freeze brand is super popular now, and I've had some done. But anyway, so I'd walk in, and typically I would get a hind leg if we have 50, 80, 100 calves in the corner. We do it in different groups. Grab a hind leg, drag them out a little closer to the fire, and then switch hands, reach down, grab the flank with my left hand under the neck, the dewlap, and just pick them up carefully. Got chewed out when I first started. If you let them turn up too much, they land on their spine. If you drop them too hard, and you just lay them down. Then you put a knee in their neck, pull their leg up on top. And here was the key that I found out from my, not Grant, but from my mom's dad, is they have nerves in that flank. And if you squeeze that flank, they won't lay there for an hour, but it kind of, I don't know, doesn't paralyze them. But so I could grab the flank till somebody got on the back, put their heel of their boot. Most of our heels were pretty riding heels, not the flat heels that's popular today on cowboy boots, and put that in the hock and then pull the top leg up. We'd lay them on the right side because we always put the brand on the left hip. And then if I was doing the back or whoever, we kind of pull it flat where they could get a good brand, lift it up, castrate if it's a bull calf. I'd be on the front many times. I'd lift the head up so they could dehorn the bottom horn and the top one and notch the ear. We notch the right ear, and on the brand board today, the last brand book I get them every 5 years whenever they come out. It shows that 11B brand goes with a bottom notch on the right ear. So that was something you could pick out quicker if the brand didn't go. So that's what we did. Vaccinate them, dehorn them. And then I'd grab the flank again, let that guy on the back get up without getting kicked in the teeth. Because it, again, doesn't keep them from jumping up totally, but it does it doesn't stun them. It just, I don't know what that nerve does, but for a minute they won't kick, or about that long, and then he's gone and we're good. Now, since then, I've used calf tables. I've drugged a lot of calves to the branding fire. Honestly, the guys go, that's the way we used to do it. Well, usually we didn't do it. We'd do both if we had to do it out on the range. And so we'd rope the neck and the feet and then lay them down. Dragging them out, I'm not sure that what we did wasn't easier on the calves. You just walk up and pick them up and lay them down. If they're heavy, you really got to put some to it. And then I think sometimes that's easier than the longer drags, but people love doing it that way. It's kind of punchy and cowboy today, and that's how I end up if I'm helping all over. We do it that way, never use too many. Now, what happened if you're out on the range? These are a little tough because ours were about this long, but they only were a flat iron. So you can't carry that. So we used a running iron. Now, of course, they're infamous because so did the wrestlers use running irons. And you can see how, and there's one that I've used a lot. It's copper. And it just is on your saddle string on your saddle. And you get off. What I'd try to do, if we could, is if we had 2 or 3 calves and they were clear out, we missed them, we didn't get them in the gather, something happened. If you could, you catch one, jump off just like you do in a rodeo. They do in the rodeo, and get him down, tie him with a piggin string. And then usually, if you can, jump back on and go try to push another one close enough, you can rope a second calf, because if you're going to build a fire, if you can get 2 or 3 branded close to the same area, then it worked better. You can see how the rustlers would use it, because now, by the way, you're going, if that's copper and you get it red hot, how do you handle it? Which is pretty easy, but let me show you first what the rustlers would do. So they might get 11V, and they'd put a quarter circle over the top of it, or they'd do something else, and then they go That's my brand. Well, usually you could tell, and they got lynched or shot for wrestling cattle because it wasn't a real popular thing. But the way you do this, and sometimes you had to go through 2 or 3, if you get some green brush or green twigs or stick, if you stick it through it like this, 2 pieces, you can just grab the end. Can you see if you grab the end of my fingers and squeeze them together? So you stick 2 sticks through it. They're green, so they're going to burn, but not very fast. And so you can do it with one hand or get two, and you got these little sticks, and you're holding that thing by squeezing those 2 together. And then you just put the 11V on, throw it back in the dirt, let it cool off. Doesn't take very long. And so that's a running iron, and that's how you did it. Wrestlers did it, but all of the cowboys used that when they had to brand on the range. So that's what we did. And let's see where we are here, and I'm watching. Okay, now I don't know when I started, Jerry, but we'll get through some of this, and I appreciated your introduction. So that's what we do. Other ranch families that were here that I heard a lot about the names, the Murrays that helped build the railroad through the gorge. They ranched on Current Creek, up on 8 Mile Mountain, which is on our side. That's what we ranched on, was 8 Mile Mountain, and the Twin Mountain Ranch south, and Twin Mountains south, and it's right behind the rafting companies now. All that was the property we had right to the highway, and that was sold later. And so we came along and had that. John Murray, I think, married Jim Harvey's daughter. I rode a lot with Jim when he was older. His brother was Leonard, had polio. They lived where the big gravel thing is now, that if you're ever driving from Salida at night, you can't see the highway because they got that big high light. Has anybody done that? Boy, it's almost blinding when you're coming east from Salida or from Texas Creek or somewhere. But that was the Harvey Ranch, and they ran cattle clear on up past 31 Mile Mountain, clear toward Hartselle, different places at that time. Now, they weren't the beginning. John Murray had it first, and he married Jim's daughter. And then they went all the way to Dix Peak. I rode there a lot. Leonard had polio when he was young, lost his legs, and was a tremendous cowboy. His shoulders were like this, and his arms, and he would reach up with his right hand and grab the stirrup, maybe both to start with, pull himself up, reach and grab the horn and swing on, and was a tremendous cowboy, ride all day. One time we had some cattle get across Highway 9 close to Hartselle over on the grazing, South Park grazing, whatever, I can't think of it. But anyway, and they had buffalo on there. And one of the buffalo got after Leonard's horse. Here he has no legs to balance, no legs to squeeze. And horses don't outrun buffalo very well. They're super fast. But he did by dodging and doing stuff, and we got completely away. I thought, boy, he's unbelievable. But that was Leonard Harvey. And then Jim's son was Johnny Harvey, who I rode for many, many years. And when I was pastoring in Woodland Park from 75 to 82, I had 7 mares and a good stud, really good stud out of Crestone. And so I always had colts every year, and I'd ride some outside colts. So that was a great way. He had a 10,000 acre pasture leased on Forest, and I'd go up once a week and as often as I could and check cattle and start colts. It was a great way to do it. So the cheating part I mentioned, and I'll try to get through, won't be much longer. We'll do some questions. Cheating part on colts, like those 7 I raised every year and outside people's colts, I never considered myself a bronc rider, so I called it cheating. So the day they were born, I'd throw a blanket on them and put a little halter on them and lead them around. And then I'd pick their feet up and have a rock close somewhere by then. I'd tap their feet. Well, when they've time 2 years later for them to get shod, no big deal. I had that happen my whole life. When the kids got a little older, now don't turn me in for this. I think the statute of limitations is over. But they'd be 3 years old or 4, whatever, and I never had one hurt. I'd have the lead rope in one hand, the colts are small, and I'd just pick them up, put them on their back, and I'd hold on to an arm. So if the colts started doing something, I could just set them behind me. If the horse kicked or ran into me or whatever, never touch them. If he didn't, I'm leading them like this and holding on a kid, and they got used to that, so they never bucked. They just didn't ever start it. They didn't do it. Years later, some brilliant person comes up with the term implanting, and you're imprinting in their minds, and you do all this stuff when they're babies. And I'm going, I thought that was cheating. I guess I was imprinting all those years because I didn't like getting bucked off of 4-year-old horses when you get on them for the first time or you do something. So anyway, that worked well. Dud Van Vestkirk, my Aunt Estelle's dad, not only ranch areas I talked about, he was state brand inspector in the 30s, president of the Cattlemen's Association, as was, of course, Bob Shoemaker, many other guys later, was sheriff of Fremont County, Dud Van Buskirk Sr. The early ranchers that I heard about were the Blacks, Clyde and Frank Black, and I rode a lot with Frank Jr. after that and did his funeral. Nate Patton, Bob Shoemaker, obviously the Chesses, Grant Chess and Debbie still come to our Cowboy Church service every Monday night that we do right here. Depends on who I'm talking to. We started it by invitation, probably can't tell the government this either, of the city and the Chamber of Commerce in Veterans Park. And I did that for 20 years, or I have now, close to it, in the summers. And then people liked the way that service was, and let's do it year round. So we met several places. And then COVID hit, and we didn't have any parks to meet in. We couldn't be in Veterans Park. And Larry Weaver at First Baptist, 7th and Macon, right across from the old courthouse, or the other end's where you get your license plate, he said, use our park. And I said, what park? I lived here my whole life. He goes, the park next to the church. I said, there's not a park. He goes, yeah, there is. It's grass, and there's a concrete slab for sound equipment. There's a jungle gym and playground for kids. And I'm going, next to First Baptist Church? So he said, yeah, you can meet there in the summer. Don't tell the governor, but you can meet there in the summer when you're not supposed to be meeting outside. Nobody ever got COVID. And so we did that. And then Larry and his board said, why don't you just, instead of going somewhere else, why don't you meet in our building in the winter? So we've been doing that, and that works good, Monday night, 6:30. But for some people in town, I invite them, and they go, I have no idea. I go, right behind Brother's place. Oh, I know exactly where you are. That's where you are, right across the alley from Brother's Place. I can find that. I go, good, come on. Don't spend too much time in Brother's Place before you come across the alley, or you won't recognize the songs. But anyway, so anyway, and then one of the names, Wart Pig, Wharton, I think, was maybe a full name, but Wart Pig is what I always heard him called, W-H-A-T-T, or W-H-A-R-T. Owned the Stirrup Ranch at the turn of the century and sold it to Frank Christopher, who I got to know well as a kid. And at one time, Stirrup Ranch and a couple more that Christopher added after that had over 40,000 acres and sold 700 plus calves a year. It's pretty huge for those days. And I got to ride that ranch a lot. He ran that, believe it or not, almost the whole time except for when he was hanged by himself. 40,000 acres, 700 mother cows or more. And he died in 69, just after I graduated from high school in 68. My uncle passed away in 73, shortly after that. And my father died on the Stirrup Ranch, and I scattered some of his ashes up there as well as the Twin Mountain Ranch. So you'll remember Wart Pig, because if you ever read the story of Old Mose. He ranched there, but he desperately wanted to kill Old Mose. A lot was inflated, but they feel like there was a pretty close estimate that bear, the big grizzly, maybe not now the last grizzly. I think somebody killed one in the Sangre de Cristos, but with a bow some years ago. But at that time, last grizzly they knew of, and he killed over $30,000 worth of cattle that they counted by talking to cattlemen. And some of those times, like when I said the cattle crash in the 30s, cows were bringing $5. And then 20 some dollars. And then it did get up, as Jerry well expressed. But if you can imagine 30 plus horses, and they estimated around 800 head of cattle over a lengthy time, because some of the bears, the one that I have taken that is a grizzly, was 21 years old when they aged his teeth and could have lived much longer. So they said that they thought Old Mose was close to 30. The problem was, Pig tried to kill him for years, and then when he killed, can't think of the guy's name that he killed, who was hunting deer on Black Mountain, and he killed that person. They said killed several others. They put out a $500 reward, and what was the guy's name? James Anthony, came from back east with a pack of dogs and was the one that actually killed him, much to Wart Pig's dismay and anger. And the neat thing with that is, documented, is I guess he was there to help him. And I think Pig wanted to skin him out, get him out easier, but Anthony, or one way or another, wanted to bring him out whole and drive all over town with the wagon or whatever. And so Pig was ready to skin him, was mad with his sheath knife that they all carried, and stuck it in a tree and forgot it. And then years later, I've had several people tell me that Virgil Lawson, that ranches up off that, has the knife and found it. So kind of a neat story, but that was Wharton Pig. Okay, that's a little bit. Now let me quickly finish with the change in my cowboy life. Still get to do some of that. Haven't started the last colt's probably been 3 years ago. And I have, when the doctors recently looked at some things with sciatic pain, a lot of stuff that you folks have and a lot of us, and they said, you have how are you walking? You have 2 discs complete, one's mangled. That's the worst we've ever seen. What did you do to your back? I said, everything I ever wanted to do. Started colts, hunted sheep, came off mountains. I wouldn't trade it for having been, my father-in-law, Lisa's dad, ran a store, worked at it at 14 years old, in a little town below Nebraska in Concordia, Kansas, right above Salina, and bought into it, bought half of it, bought all of it, and was in the store 52 years, 58 years. And he was here at Christmas, and one of the guys there said, he said, you know what, Grant's just left to go feed horses, and he is broke up. He said, I'm 88 years old, and I don't have anything wrong like he does. And they said, and his grandson said, Grandpa, you never did anything. He said, I what? He goes, you never played sports, you never rode a horse, you never rode a bike, you walked to work, you spent 60 years in a clothing store, and I'm pretty sure Grant wouldn't trade you for having stood in the store and fitted guys in suits and ties and shirts, which he loved doing, and he's a great guy. He just doesn't have anything wrong with his body. And so anyway, then 1973, I mentioned Nate Patton's niece was married Mark Schricker, more what we call bridesmaids in the professional rodeo. In other words, he was second place, the bridesmaid, over and over and over when there was no computers. He didn't know he only needed $70 more. Could have gone to 4 more rodeos. So he was runner-up for all-round world champion, runner-up for calf roping world champion, running up for bulldogging, steer wrestling now. And so he had the place there that my uncle watched the roping the night he died. And they called me and said, hey, 2 of us as National Final Cowboys are Christians. We've accepted Christ as our Savior. But we can't go to church. There's slack every Sunday morning and rodeos every Saturday night and Sunday afternoon. Can you help us? We want it. You're roping at Colorado Springs, Woodland Park. Why don't you do a Sunday morning service horseback? So I started doing that in 1973. First of all was a cowboy chapter of Fellowship of Christian Athletes that most of every professional football team has a chaplain, a lot of high schools. We've had one here, Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And then Tom Landry was the one that said, your rodeo guys are athletes, but it's a whole different world. Why don't you start your own chapter? I mean, not to be a chapter of Fifth Christian Athletes, start your own fellowship, the Fellowship of Christian Cowboys. So we did that. I was president of that for years, and that's how I got to preach at all the major rodeos and see God do so many great things with that. I won't go into those stories. Other than that, not through the cowboy world, he opened up, the Lord has, and I've preached in almost 40 foreign countries and just had a wonderful blessing, and it's been great. But I've done that. And then right now, just finished the Pikes Peak Bus Rodeo. So most of you would say, that's nice. We have our own rodeo, and I've been on this board too, and so was my family. The difference in the Pikes Peak Bus that I love, my dad had 4 Purple Hearts from World War II in the Philippines. And I saw the shrapnel, the scars. One of the young man here worked with him. He still had a career, but he was pretty severely shot up. And so I've always had a heart for that. And that's why for the last many years in our hunting camps, carrying on after my granddad with Teddy Roosevelt, we take wounded warriors and wounded heroes, double amputees, a triple amputee on a bow hunt, one arm, with a piece of leather on the string. He'd get it off, put the arrow on, put the leather in his teeth, looked at the sight, open his mouth, shoot the arrow. So we love doing that. We just lost the ranch I was on 31 years out of Pagosa, so we're kind of evaluating where the Lord wants us to do that with these guys and gals, Gold Star widows that lost their husband. And we've been on a number of the TV shows with one of them on 2020. But anyway, so the Pikes Peak Bus Rodeo since 1946, Spencer Penrose stated, all proceeds, we will never have a paid position. We have 138 volunteers. I've been president of the rodeo, Pikes Peak Bus, and every penny goes to local military and law enforcement families if there's needs. When they've lost a loved one, they have needs. Big sponsors, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Braxton, that came up, that he originally came up with the GPS concept, the very first one, and has that worldwide, and it's sold now to another company. They put a bunch into the rodeo so we can do more. So as president, we missed 2020, as you might guess why. And in 19, I wrote checks for almost $200,000, not to a organization. Here you go, Army, here's 100,000. Nope, we wrote 80,000 to cancer wives that didn't have benefits. So they couldn't get plastic surgery, couldn't get wigs, didn't have any help. So we wrote check to them. So I love rodeo and have my whole life, but when you can do that and help a ton of folks who've put their lives on the line, lost their husbands, lost their legs, that's one of my real loves. And we just finished 2 weeks ago. Looks like we broke all records, so we'll write over $200,000 worth of checks and present those. Then we did the street breakfast. Anybody ever been in the Colorado Springs street breakfast? A couple of you. And we made profit of $30,000 selling tokens for breakfast for $5, and just presented that to 3 different organizations, Air Force, Army, and then the one that takes care of our homeless guys. We got a bunch of guys and gals on the street that don't want to be homeless. Unfortunately, there's a bunch of homeless people that do want to be homeless, but a lot of the military folks came out and can't get a job, or they've lost a leg, or they can't do this. So the Mount Carmel Foundation, we gave $9,000 to them. So that was a week ago. That's what we do, guiding wounded soldiers. Pikes Peak Range Riders, I've been president of that too, and they do the same thing. We ride Pikes Peak, ride the ranches, 160 members, and all the proceeds go to local. We've done it in Fremont County, Chaffee, all over, families who have needs out of military, and then we've expanded it. Fortunately, there's not as much with law enforcement because by God's grace, you don't have many of them killed like you do in Iraq and Afghanistan and Vietnam, and we're still doing some. I just hosted a 98-year-old World War II wounded hero on the balcony as I opened in prayer for every one of the performances of the Pikes Peak Bust, and they gave him a standing ovation, and it was pretty cool. 98 years old, some of America's greatest generation, World War II, and so that's what we do. That's where we are today, and that's about it. So this little thing, I showed you the running iron and the main iron, horse iron there. This is the first an idea I had 25 years ago. These are out of print right now. This was the first one, called it the Wafer Cowboys. And I put a bunch of pictures where it's like a little testimonies of ranchers, world champion. There's Cody Custer, world champion bull rider, and their testimony of what God as creator did. I got to be in it since I edited it, but I know, blatant self-promotion, but anyway, on one of the best roping horses I ever had, a big bay horse, and that's against the Castles in Gunnison on one of those rides. So pretty neat. And that's number 1. We've done 3 now. We have a current one, if anybody wants one. I did not bring a case because I just left him at the fair. I preached at the Cowboy Church at our county fair this morning and left him a case of the brand new ones. It's a whole Bible and the New Living, and I only did the little middle part with pictures and some helps on knowing the Lord and how to go through struggles of life and whatever. So this one is 25 years old now, and to God's grace, and I'll close with this, I got a call A year and a half afterwards from International Bible Society, Colorado Springs, that did the printing of it. And God had to provide, because I had to buy 10,000 of them as part of the deal if they were going to put this out. And the Lord helped us do that. And they said, we just want you to know it's the most shipped Bible to all of Europe. I said, okay, the phone break up. You said Wyoming, Montana? No, Europe. I said, what? They said, you know how in America they do like mountain man rendezvous and stuff, and they dress up like Bridger and all that? I go, yeah. They do that all over Europe with cowboys. They've never been on a horse, but they watched Clint Eastwood, spaghetti westerns, John Wayne. So they dress like John Wayne. They have a big weekend camp thing. They're crazy about the American cowboy, and they love this Bible, this New Testament. I said, that I would have never expected. I thought I'd just take it to rodeos like I did the county fair this morning with the new one. And then, so that's been pretty neat. And then we did a hunting and fishing one, got Charlie Daniels and Ed Weatherby, different guys to give their testimony. New one of those is coming out. Just did a fishing one. And then we've done a middle one of these. We did another one in the middle. So that's been really cool. I took it to Siberia, Russia. And with the translator, they loved it too. I found Russians have a thing about the American cowboy. And so we were in Siberia, Russia, and they loved this little book, partly because we can do it. One last testimony. One of our guys, and some of you may have met him, he helped start the Wild Horse program out here. He's a Native American, retired as colonel. So I'm talking about pretty sharp dude, right? But Einstein said, some of the people that know the least are geniuses in areas they don't know anything about. So he came on the ride, 160 guys, and I gave every one of them. I just gave 200 of them out up on the Beaver Meadows Ranch and stuff up above off the side of Pikes Peak this year of the new whole Bible. Before that, it was all New Testament. So he's doing, for years, I did Cowboy Church for Michael Murphy at Westfest. We had 71,000 people on the ski. It looked like, because, they'd just sit on the ski slope all the way up, and they'd have these huge Woodstock kind of pillars of things, and they'd have all the singers and for the day. And then Murphy, he's so off the wall, and he'd go, Grant, just one time he goes, get up here, bring that Bible, read scripture, and pray before Willie Nelson comes and sings. I said, okay. So, but you know me, I'm going to be a nut. So I went, folks, get ready, because this may be the first time Willie Nelson was ever introduced with prayer in the Bible. Maybe. Pot maybe, but not prayer in the Bible. But anyway, so we've had a great time. Well, he was there doing the wild horse deal, because they'd bring in wild horses, and they'd have Craig Cameron start them, and in 3 days, they'd have him following him, and he'd have him saddled, and he'd be on him. Neat demonstration. So now we're at Westfest. And he says, Grant, you gave me one of those on that ride. Well, I've got 2 boys. Can you get me 2 more? I said, sure, got a case in the thing. Now, keep in mind, retired colonel, head of the Wild Horse program nationwide for a while, American Native Indian. And I said, sure. So I come back to the booth, and here's his wife. Ted was gone. And I said, could you give these to Ted for his boys? And she goes, yes, I don't see him. Let me tell you something. I came to know Christ in college, and he told me all of our married life, if you think you need God, you're weak, and I'm strong enough for both of us, so you trust me instead of him. So I just had to keep it kind of undercover. But when you gave him this, and he would never open my Bible, never, he said, I want nothing to do with that book. That's religion, that's brainwashing people, all the rest. But he loved the pictures in here. He said, this is like a little coffee table book. And so he'd look at the pictures. Then he started reading testimonies about, here's a world champion cowboy, and Christ changed his life, and here's this rancher in New Mexico and barrel racer. So then he started reading the Bible. But guess what? It says, the way for cowboys. So every night, most nights, he'll go, listen to this one. For God so loved the world. That's why I never needed your darn Bible. This is what God said to cowboys here. I said, you're kidding me. She goes, no, he believes that. God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son. He goes, See how simple that's what cowboys need. I don't know what you ever read, but I don't want to touch that, but this is for cow. I said, he really believes that? She said, absolutely. I said, don't tell him. So God bless you. Thank you.
That was superb. Thank you. We'll give you anybody have any questions? Yeah, one back there.
Big job.
From the county line over to Pueblo, there's Walker Ranch on both sides of the road.
Yeah.
Is that the same guy you're talking about?
No, not the same Walker. And we've ridden that ranch. He was an African PH, did a bunch of stuff, unusual fellow, got a lot of Hollywood coverage. His son Remy's a good friend and a Pikes Peak Range rider. His son Johnny's adopted and a very close friend of mine. And that's not the same Walker. He does own a ton and has a lot of interesting stuff on that ranch. We'll talk about that sometime because you're a car guy and he's got this unbelievable collection of something you can't find Camaro, and he's got the designer signed on the engine in white and all that, but unusual fellow. Wrong guy.
There was a Hall of Fame baseball player that I can't remember his name that bought the Kern Creek Ranch.
Yeah.
Goose.
Goose Gossage owned the ranch. He does not now. That was when my dad hunted on there. He made friends with Goose's brother-in-law, Mark. And we had worked and done some cattle when I had done a bunch before that. And so he was hunting on there when he died of a heart attack. And Goose Gossage had it.
He was driving through town one night with his whole crew, and they were headed up there to do some hunting.
You did not stop him.
As a matter of fact.
John is a retired police officer from Canyon City, but he still gives tickets, so be careful leaving. No.
He had guns everywhere, so I was very polite to him. And I knew who he was. I mean, I didn't when I walked up to the car. He was a very friendly guy. Said he bought that ranch and did some stuff. So, yeah, that was a neat.
Yeah, a neat guy, had that ranch a long time and then sold it. But Hall of Fame. Other questions, comments, thoughts? Nobody? Okay, I either did a terrible job or a good job on it. I don't know which.
Thank you all for coming. And I just kind of have a inkling you've learned a little something today. Have a nice afternoon.